Oh yes, before we start, as you look through those slides, what comes to mind? Anybody? Cesar Medellin, Colombia is here. When you look at those pictures, so we start all over again, what comes to your mind? Any feeling, anything?
Always the same pictures?
Huh?
Always the same pictures?
Okay, so the show is a slideshow. Okay. What else? Yes? Yeah? Groups, communities, yes, important words, yeah. Somebody else? Huh? Ah, they are smiling. So, okay, that's a good point. Hopefully they're smiling. So not need-based, but asset-based.
A lot of them seem like very development work. World Bank, IMF.
Kind of stuff. Yeah, so this looks like the focus of the activities is more like development. Sustainable development or...
That's yet to be proven.
Yeah. That's what we're trying to prove, actually. What else do you see? Anybody, any ideas on what those pictures brings to mind?
I found it education-based, like they're teaching.
Education-based.
Support, having the mom
Support, yeah.
different cultures, different countries, different, like people from the world.
Yes, so diversity, that's a good point, that's the point to the whole thing, is that this particular methodology approach that I'd like to, that both Gregory and I want to share with you today is about something that's applicable worldwide in many, many sectors. Maybe you could see there was, as you mentioned, something about nutrition, this is girl trafficking, but also you may have seen that there were examples from our so-called developed world. I don't know how developed we are, but anyway, what did you see? Example from where? From our developed world? Denmark. Where else? Do we have Danish people here? No. Okay, so that's enough. That's the point I wanted to make.
Okay, so the topic is positive deviance approach, and it is a way to move people toward their own objectives, facing intractable problems. At HEC Paris, we like key figures, so It's important because positive deviance approach is driven by data from the beginning to the feedback we've got at the end of the process. So right now, what Monique will present are child malnutrition, which is the first and one of the most well-known cases about positive deviance. But we've got some issues with maladie nosocomiale in US hospitals. You enter the hospital and you could even die. We've got 100,000 people each year who are dying from MRSA. So we've got some cases in Pakistan in Pashtun community, and all those figures are amazing because if we respect the protocols that have been built day after day, years after years, for the first 6 years from 1990 to 1996 in Vietnam and then in Egypt and Pakistan, we could get amazing results regarding those intractable problems. We talked about international. From the latest figures we had, it was 40, 45 countries where we tackled some issues. And as a presentation to myself and to Monique, this year is a special year because it's the 25th birthday of the positive deviance approach. Monique and Jerry entered Vietnam in December 1990, and they were, I think, among the first 20 American who were entering the Vietnam territory at that time. I work with Monique and with a team of positive deviance practitioners. I've worked for a couple of years, and our goal is to strengthen the positive deviance community and project at an international level, and for my part, especially at a French level or through French schools. So it was through 3 key things. The first was as a CCC. I did the HCC Oxford Executive Master Consulting and Coaching for Change, where I discovered the positive deviance approach. I wanted that all the HCC Paris main degree could access to the same information. So for me it was important, and I thanks Benedict, Liz and Elizabeth to offer the opportunity to talk to you today. The second, I am the co-chair at HCC Alumni of the consulting group. And for that, I organize 2 to 3 times a year a conference. And in late January, with Oxford Alumni and Harvard Club of Friends, we organized a conference, which is available on video, about positive deviance approach. And it was quite interesting because it led to this conference, because Liz and Benedict attended this conference. The third is, as a researcher, as a journalist, and as a business consultant, I wanted to go deeper in the approach. So through Monique Networks, I went in Asia, in different NGOs, and looking as in cases like infant malnutrition in Cambodia especially, I worked and researched through people who were using positive deviance. And it led to a couple of articles, 3 in Challenge magazine. The French people might know this magazine, the Echo and Challenge, which are quite interesting. And we released the second Harvard Business Review article about Merck, which is a very large pharmaceutical company, a couple of days ago. So those information might be available to the French and international community. For us, it was the opportunity to let Jerry, who co-founded the approach and died in 2008, present to you the approach. So we wanted to present it through video of Jerry and a couple of practitioners.
I think the first thing that we need to do, and this requires a real 180-degree mind shift, is to understand that the world's greatest expert on how to be a successful entrepreneur in Alex is the woman or the guy who is a successful entrepreneur in Alex. The world's greatest expert on how to have a well-nourished child despite poverty is that Vietnamese woman who comes from a very poor family who has a well-nourished child. So the first thing we need to do, which is very difficult, is for us to truly have the humility and the wisdom to know that the expertise, the real expertise, the real solutions lie within that community. That doesn't mean, however, that we have nothing to contribute, otherwise we wouldn't be here. But our contribution is to be a facilitator to help people to find their own answers and to find their own solutions. First of all, the term PD is one which we use all the time, but positive deviant, but many people, myself included, hate the term because deviant is something which sounds bad and negative. But we use the term positive deviant because the actual term comes from the sciences. There's a bell curve that we all know about, and there are people who are on the positive end of the bell curve. They have better outcomes. And so the scientific term is positive deviance. We don't use that when we work with communities at all, but shorthand for our work here today, we're using that term. But I wanted to make it clear that you don't have to call it positive deviance. It's basically some folks who do better than others within the same resource base. When we talk about positive deviance, that's something we do in our office and symposia when we're working with villagers in Malawi, in Vietnam, in China, wherever. we never use the term positive deviant. As we explain the approach, we say to the villagers, what do you want to call this program? And some of the wonderful names of programs in Bangladesh, it's called Keno Parbo Na, which means why not? In one country in Africa, I believe it was Mali, they chose to call the program The Far Away Stick Cannot Kill the Nearby Snake. That was a saying in the culture, and they said, that's what positive deviance is. So please don't be put off by the term positive deviance. It just means what's going right today in our community, who has answers and solutions. But with my PD lens, walking any place, I can't help but see that there are differences, and that's what this positive deviance approach is all about. There are some kids who look healthier and happier and more vibrant than others. There are some folks who are walking looking quite dejected, others who are quite lively. And again, with my PD lens, I would imagine that the ones who are happier are not necessarily richer, better educated, etc., etc. They may have some life strategies which are different from the folks who are depressed, dejected. The ones that have succeeded are not necessarily smarter, richer, better educated, but yet they've succeeded when their neighbors have not. And using this positive deviance approach, we can learn what is it that those successful entrepreneurs, who we call positive deviants, are doing which is different from their neighbors, and of those practices which are different, which one of those are truly accessible to everybody. And right now we are trying, as we speak, in interviews throughout the building, to really understand what are the differences between people who are not doing that well with their business and those who are really succeeding. And then we will be meeting over the next few days to try and take what we have learned and to build it into a program which will enable the business place to better serve their clients.
Oh yeah, so this is interesting actually, because that was part of a Danish business school that folded for I don't know what reason, but they called it the 180-degree academy. So they took people like you're going to do maybe in a week or two, when you're going to go some to London and some are going to partner with local people. And in this case, to learn about positive deviance, they took this group of Danish MBAs to South Africa and partner with a local NGO who did work in group not group lending, social lending. How do you call it? Social. What's the word? Microfinance. Voila. Already. The wisdom is in the room, in the crowd. It's not with a guru or person. So thank you for your contribution right there. So yes, was working on micro lending, and they had lots of difficulties. So in this case, they tried to see the few, they had a name for them, monitors, who were able to have clients who were more successful, whereas most of the other people were not having success with their clients. So that's a little bit your world. When you look at what I was going to follow, think a bit of it as when you do social business, this particular approach or methodology might be useful in the interface between the business and the people, the social mandate, interface between the business and the people, the community that this business is involved with. So what is positive deviance? There'll be a few slides. As we go along, we switch back and forth to keep you awake, hopefully. So, and we'll ask you to participate as well. So there's a few regular slides. I apologize for that, but then you can get them afterwards if you're interested. So as Benedict said, highlighted at the beginning, it's a strength-based problem-solving approach that creates measurable, data-driven, and sustainable, lasting results by leveraging existing solutions in the community. Community can be many, many types. Could be an organization, could be a department, in a ministry, could be schools, etc. Could be hospitals, could be even a business, evidently. So when I say the word community, when we talk about communities, it's a very large, in a large sense. And then those solutions are lasting because of they promote behavior and social change. Well, I should click. I have to click. This is a tool. Interrupt me when you don't understand. We want this to be a bit lively, even at 5 o'clock in the evening after a day of work. So what we'd like to do in less than, the clock is ticking, guys. Remind us that what we'd like to explore with you and give you a little bit of orientation on the PD approach with some case studies in and out, but I'll have you maybe share some of maybe stories you already have in your mind, of you have experienced, and then the PD journey as a social entrepreneur, maybe some reflection on, just to say the mistake we made and the lessons we had in creating that tool, if some of you are social entrepreneur, and then more question and answer. But please do not hesitate to interrupt us, right? So the concept is very simple. Voilà. In every community, this is an observation. It's not an hypothesis. Solutions to very complex problems already exist. So it's going to threaten us because here you're learning to be experts. You're going to specialize in a field. And here I am telling you, guys, look around. And it is actually, this approach asks you to do, as Jerry said earlier, a very challenging thing for many, many expert people. It's to look at problem through different glasses, and actually discover that some of the solution to very difficult problem already exist. They've been devised by the people, usually the frontline people, not the experts, evidently, and there's a connection between the solution and the prevention or solving a specific problem. But these people are not the outliers that you probably read. How many of you have read, comment il s'appelle? Malcolm Gladwell, Outliers? Okay. So I don't think I'm talking about those outliers. The Steve Jobs of this world or the Bill Gates that we know. We're talking about very, very ordinary people. And that's the power of this approach, because if they can do it, so can anybody else. And it's sustainable. So the positive deviance is not something we invented. We wouldn't dare do anything like this. It's been used in research. So it's a very scientific approach in some ways, because it's been used in research, particularly in nutrition. And we actually we read this book, evidence-based. This is our religion. Everything we do has to be evidence-based, otherwise it doesn't exist. Although we have still few questions about God, and how can we prove that God exists or things like that. But anyway, our current religion is evidence-based, research-based, whatever it is. So we actually read this book, and on the base of this book, we said, wow! So in nutrition, there are, in a population, in countries, communities where there are high level of malnutrition, there are always some people who are poor but have well-nourished children. Why not learn from them? How many of you have seen the TED Talk thing? Or?
I have read, I think, the paper on
What?
Vietnam.
Oh, a paper, did you?
This approach.
Did anybody read this? No, because if you did,
Yeah,
the
that's
idea is not to
right.
talk about it too much, except for.
Normally they should have read.
Okay, so too bad. If you haven't, you can always go. There's also a TED talk that's easy to, but it's a bit long, 12 minutes. Maybe it's too much for you. Anyway, from this, we operationalize a concept that was used in research to make it, to implement first in nutrition and then elsewhere. So the PD, the field of research in PD is huge. I mean, if you're interested, you can go through the literature on some website, and it's very popular these days. If you need money, if you want to get sponsorship, scholarships, using positive deviance is in vogue. It's in fashion. It's a fashion. But I'm not interested in that. But anyway, this is an example of a research in action using positive deviance to improve quality of care in the US. Big problem in healthcare in the US, where I happen to live. So again, getting research can also prove research the approach itself and make it valid. So I'm talking in front of you because I get validation of this particular tool that my husband and I so pioneered in a way. And we got the letter of approval from the intellectual, academic, research, scientific community, which you need when you want. A social entrepreneur, if you do something, you're going to have to get the validation. Okay, so Jerry talked about this, and we talked about the outliers. We're looking at these peoples, oftentimes statistically insignificant. But again, it's looking, instead of concentrating on the need, which you're going to want to work. All of us want to improve the world. How many of you think they're agent of change? That's one of your mission in life, is to be agent of change, no? How many of you want to change the world? Me too. But actually, we look at the needs and we say, where's my place? Where's my mission? What can I do to save the world? This approach is slightly different. And I don't have time to explain my story, but you learn from mistakes, you learn from failure, and you realize that actually we don't change the world changes itself. And maybe this particular tool and methodology leverage the existing power, potential, wisdom, genius of the people who have overcome or prevented the problem we are all concerned about, that people suffer from, without special resources. So very powerful, because it's already there. But it's okay to want to change the world too. I agree. So these are some positive, oh, maybe I should go quickly because, so we talk, this is a Nepalese woman, so she has a healthy child, where maybe all her neighbors don't, so what is she doing? Here is a girl, young girl in Alexandria, Egypt, where female genital cutting in Egypt was at least 97% of married women are circumcised. So it's a virtual, virtual what? I forget my word. It's a practice that's done by everyone. Huh? Universal. That's what I was looking. Don't hesitate to give me words. That means you're listening. Near universal practice. When we were there, 97% of every married women are circumcised. What would be what Jerry would do? My husband would do like this. What would be, what we would say if we look at this problem with PD lens? Anybody? Ah, you agree? Yeah, huh? Husband and, yeah. So look at the 3%. In Egypt, given the demographic at the time, it's 500,000 women are not circumcised out of the millions. And this girl is one of them. Can we find people who said no? What's particular about this little girl, and I should not talk too much about it, but it's about them, it's not about us, right? This little girl actually convinced her mother, which is very unusual in a culture where children are heard but not allowed. No, children are not heard of, but children are not listened to. They do what they're told. But she managed to convince her own mother not to circumcise her. So that's an example. Here you have transvestite sex workers in Indonesia who also have been able successfully to prevent HIV/AIDS with their clients because they are commercial sex workers. This is in the US. This particular man is an escort, and he has a special way to prevent the spread of hospital-acquired infection in this, I know where it is, so I can tell you, it's a VA hospital in Pittsburgh. And this particular man here, in a program against malaria, you know, many people involved in the organization involved in malaria, is telling me I'm going too slow or too much. Anyway, he has found a way to not to get malaria. And this is people in Ethiopia, interesting program all over the world. Everybody concentrate on the adolescent girl. You may know that the adolescent girl is a new group that everybody is concentrating on to alleviate poverty because they get married very young. They drop out of school. This program was where this very poor family, as you can see, usually this young girl, adolescent girl or pre-adolescent girl, has to drop out of school because they are so poor. So how is it possible for this family to keep that girl in school? Which means that she'll marry later, she'll have pregnancy later, she'll be able, as you all know, education is key to alleviate poverty. Both are so, and also not just individual, but whole organizations where this work can be done. So in Argentina with schools, so you can take this at different levels. You can take this approach. Here it was a district with a lot of schools failing to keep primary school children in school, in Misiones. And so they looked at they invited the worst performing school in that district to look at the best performing school. So again, taking it at a different level. The prison in Denmark, you'll hear more about this from a video, and then hospital in the US. That's going on in many different hospitals, this approach. So when do you use this particular approach? You don't use it if you need improvement. You probably have learned already in your master MBA. There are many behavior change methods for organizational change, for business change. And if you want to improve something, you don't use this approach. This approach is used when the problem you identified is not a technical problem, but a problem that has something to do with behavior, with culture, with social issues, so complex problem. Because if technology does it, great. I mean, you don't need to use this at all. An example is when you look at hospital-acquired infection, we think technology is going to solve many problems. You probably have tons of examples where cell phones were introduced or whatever. The technology is good, but the technology not necessarily is enough when you are dealing with behavior and social change. So you use this when the problem is so complex that it needs to address some issues in the system that are not technical. Is that okay? Any of you know Heifetz's adaptive change theory? No, that's okay. You don't have to. And the problem is chronic, widespread, not affecting a minority in the community. The people who have this problem need to be, that's not a very good term, but not just a few people. If it's 10 people, PD, you don't do PD at all unless you have 30 of something, 30 individuals, 30 groups, 30 schools, or, a certain number of people. You could see from the slideshow, it's a lot of people. It's collective action, not just at individual level. And also the problem has been deemed, you can't do anything about it. Unemployment in France. That's the latest talk. And those of you who are French, how many French people here? Can somebody give me the latest figures on unemployment in France? No. Oh. 3.5 million. And then what's the latest March? We're in April. March data or something?
More than 10%. 10%.
Oh, it's still more than 10%. It's a little bit, the increase continue. The Prime Minister said the increase in unemployment continues, but it's a little bit less of an increase than last year at the same time. Anyway, a very difficult problem. I mention it because, so you didn't watch television. Okay, I happen to watch television. And all the expert economists are trying to solve that problem, evidently. And expert-driven approach don't work. There was a woman in one of the panel presentation in, I think it's, I don't know which television channel. I don't live in France, so I don't know. She came with a little book, like a bit the Positive Deviance book, actually, that actually, she said, there are actually people who have difficulty getting jobs who get jobs in France. And they are all those case studies. That's Positive Deviance. But in any way, think of difficult problems. And then, you always need, this kind of business is very dangerous, so you need leadership support and commitment. Because we know where we failed. When you're looking for a very difficult problem and try to promote change as a catalyst, it's very dangerous. So this is just a summary. We talked about that already, no? We look for indigenous existing solution. They are the reverse of best practice, cookie cutter, replication, one size fits all. That's not PD. PD looks at what works in context, in culture. What you're learning at this school, where you come from different countries in the world, you still have to adapt to your culture, to your context. So PD is always contextual and easy to replicate. As I said, people pick it up rapidly. It's cheap and, last but not least, sustainable. Okay, so as we learn to do this in many different environments, we started with malnutrition we didn't know what we were doing, evidently. But we found our way in Vietnam, where we had no resources, we didn't know anything. We are not nutritionists, so we're not experts. And we actually, with the government, different existing organizations within the Vietnamese system, the Communist Party, the Women's Union, which is a mass organization, and the health system, at all levels, but at the community level, look for solutions and found them. We said, oh, and it worked. It worked, it was leveraged to millions of people, so it actually worked and was sustained. We have all the studies to do that because everybody was on a computer. Everything was, we have, as we said, a lot of data. We moved on and we said, well, there's something about what we did that was successful. What if we try to apply what the patterns, the thing that made this successful, in next we happened to move to Egypt, so that's where the experimenting in Egypt with this concept on female genital cutting, advocacy against female genital cutting, we came up with it was successful too. So I said, how can it be? There must be some pattern. So it's our little experiment in social entrepreneurship that we try something that works. You know, you always try things. like in a lab, if you could. And then it works, and then you try it somewhere else, completely different problem, completely different situation, and yet it works again. So we came up by doing this through different sectors, different problem. We came up with this, I call it a template, because it gives you a sort of methodology. You need something. So this is what we came up with the community organization member, hospital people, etc. They define the problem and what they want. That's very hard to do. It looks simple, but it's not. Then they identify, so they need data for this. They identify the individual or groups that are different from the norm, and then they discover what they do. You don't have to write because we can give you the slide. And then they develop an action plan to enable all the stakeholders to practice. So go back to Benedict's point that you don't just tell people what to do, but you develop some kind of activity. And last but not least, you monitor progress. So this was sort of a method, like a recipe, if you will. So we developed that recipe, and it seems to work. But again, you don't need the tools. Oh yeah, stop. I don't think in these very critical problems, people just look. The people, this is a bit scientific, but to determine who are the PD people, the community or the group, they have exclusion criteria. For instance, to look at families who have well-nourished children, not only there's a poverty level criteria that they decide. It's not a UNDP criteria, it's not a government criteria, it's the people in that community who said, who are those, what is it to be poor or very poor? So that's one criteria. Second criteria, for instance, they won't look at families who have only one child, because of course you invest in that child. So there are what we call exclusion criteria. Outsiders don't decide that. I don't know if that answers your question of luck, but they will be looking at people who are just like them, who have the worst case scenario, and they decide, yeah? Sometimes they're idiosyncratic behaviors. You have to take those out. But to define the PD people, you take from the statistics, and then there's exclusion criteria that's defined by the community. We look at, they're successful, but wait a minute, some have this, that, maybe it's luck. But usually there's no luck. They actually are there. The people are there. Am I saying okay? I don't know how to explain. There are cases, because we have to be critical, we're in France. So sometimes it doesn't work because they cannot find people. Now this is a bit different because we find people in a community who do those behaviors, who manage to wash their hands, like in Vietnam. Families, I still remember, they didn't have their own well, they had to go to somebody else's well. They were very poor, young family. And so despite the difficulty, they were able to get water and use it to wash their hands. Okay. So the tools, there's many tools, but we have a mix. You mix to you or your partner or the people you work with use quantitative tools. We always start with baseline with a set of data. Sometimes it's trends. The garbage collectors case study in France actually is that that company has more and more accident on the job as they try more and more to improve the situation with technology, cameras and whatever. But the trend was there was more and more accident. So again, you can look at trends or baseline to be able to see if there are solutions right there. And also in the measurements. And then you have a lot of qualitative, other types of tools, very highly participatory tools that you use. The inquiry itself usually is something that people create themselves to look at what works, and it's observation or interview tools or stuff like that. Okay? That's just So we will hear a little bit from, what are we going to hear from? These are individuals who've been able to overcome. You want to talk about, what do you think?
The positive deviance approach have been created through the Vietnam case, which lasted 6 years. And to answer some information regarding the results, it was 2.3 million people that the program included. The change of behavior was 65%, and the sustainability was 5 years. It's the same that we have found in companies like Merck. But after the 6 years of work with Monique and Jerry, we don't want to talk only about Vietnam, because it has been built through Pakistan and through Egypt cases. So for us, what is important is not to answer the question you ask. It's not about the causality, to be really precise. It's not about the why, it's about the how. And if we understand how does it work, but not exactly why, we just try to diffuse the behaviors and look for that. It's not a why I've got a problem, it's how I can solve it. And if I've got a flat tire and I know that there is some glass in my as a problem, but I can't know how to change it, I won't go back with my car. But if I don't care about the issue, but I know how to change my car, I will go to my meeting or something else. So it's really about a how and not a why. The second point was about the lock. We are crossing datas. As Monique hasn't explained, and for those who hasn't read the case, when they arrived, the Vietnamese government asked for a sustainable solution. And as a sustainable solution, it is not NGO classic work, which is we don't want your medicine, we don't want your rice, because when you will go back in your country as American or as whatever, we will be in the same situation. So we want something which is sustainable, which is developing our autonomy. And the Vietnamese culture is about that. So it was a 6-month project that the authority asked them to do. But if you are regarding an NGO, and if you are discussing with NGO, and I do that with Malaria Consortium, with other infant malnutrition NGO, they told that they were facing a 2-year project doing in 6 months. So they were looking for common behaviors. So the luck factor was excluded, because if this person in this village, this person in another part of the village are doing the same thing, we think it could be diffused in all the parts. So it was important, and it's important for me to stress, and that's why Monique is here, not only to speak about Vietnamese, but about, for me, the second step, which was in Egypt, perhaps 5 or 6 minutes around that, and then we will go to Pakistanis when Monique worked on the Pashtun community and the infant mortality. So if you could just address 5 minutes about Egypt. Okay, what we found, quickly. And as Benedict asked, what perhaps the students have some ideas how to diffuse the positive deviance behaviors that you found.
Mm-hmm. I didn't find anything because I was not there. It was too dangerous work in Egypt for an outsider, white woman, I mean, particularly a Westerner, to be doing that work. So I was work through other people, local people. So we train people in this methodology who are directly involved in that sector. So in that case of female genital mutilation in Egypt, I work with local NGOs, local organizations whose job is, or mission is, to advocate against this practice. But they were the community that had the problem. The community, evidently, female genital mutilation is a terrible thing, but there was no way anything could happen in the community. People would have been killed. This is 1997. And so it's a taboo subject, nobody talks about. And many organizations said, I can't touch this. I cannot even try to find people in the community who are against the practice, who have said no to the practice or stop using that practice because we'll be killed. So it's quite dangerous work. But actually, again, and then that's interesting, the task force exists. We always resource-based. So there's a task force in Egypt to advocate against this practice. And they were a bit discouraged. They've been trying for a long time with very little good results. And they were looking for new strategies. So when I was invited and I talked about this positive deviant thing, Mukhtalifin in Arabic, they said, great, do a study. Because everybody said, prove that we can find people who refuse to do it, stop doing it, etc. Do a study, whatever, research. And I said, no, I'm not interested in research. I really want to see if we can try to find those people. Remember, it was the first time we moved from Vietnam, where everybody wants to have a healthy child, and when we use this, what we were learning that we call later positive deviant was very sort of easy. But in Egypt, everybody has their daughters circumcised because that's a must. It's something that's near universal, so it's a reverse. What you want to change is near universal. And actually, it's an act of love because a woman who is not circumcised cannot be married. So in a way, if you look at the culture, we never tried to change a culture. In a way, that's what it was. So what we did is we look for people, partners. People would be willing to try to find those people who say no, to learn from them what they're doing. And many people say no. But finally a Christian Coptic organization in Beni Suef, which is one governorate in Egypt. No Egyptians here? No. In any case, she said, yes, I've been trying to do advocacy work. We're not going anywhere. I'm willing to try. And so we didn't know what we were doing. We tried. And again, the community we work with was not the exact community, but the community of advocates, her staff, who could not speak about female genital cutting, this taboo subject. And remember that many of those women were circumcised themselves. So, working with them and developing not the same steps, defining the problem for them not to be able to advocate. And then have them identify who could be those people that you could learn from who have said no and have stopped circumcising girls. And they came up with a lot of people. They could be many types of people. They could be a grandmother who said enough. They could be, like you saw, a girl who convinced her mother to say no. They could be a man who is married to an uncircumcised woman. That would be. Or a doctor who doesn't do it, or even a traditional birth attendant who doesn't circumcise anymore. Anyway, there were many, many types of people. And then we worked with them to say, okay, you take 2 communities where we work and go and find those people. And they went, and they did find. We had a very simple interview points of 8 points that ask to be able to have that conversation with those people, asking them, their story, what was the turning point, what words, expression, what strategies they used to convince other people not to do it, and then what role they would be willing to play, what they think should be done, what role they're willing to play, and also do they know other people like them? So through this iterative process, more people was discovered. Long story short, the most important thing about this that made it work, and again, you call it luck, I agree, or serendipity, but what happened, and we could not foresee this, is in this conversation between the ordinary people who've been keeping this inside. They had to lie to other people. There's a lot of pressure from the community to comply to this practice. For the first time, somebody was sitting with them and listening to them. And so they were transformed because they told their story and they said, most of them said, I will help you, I will work with you in my community in different ways. For the people, the advocates who could not advocate, who sat and listened to those people, they couldn't believe it because they didn't think it was possible. And so hearing the story of those unusual people, they became transformed themselves. And it happened like the next day, they were trying to advocate with their neighbors, the people in their community. So it was transformational on both sides. Long story short, they actually, some communities, we repeated this process with Muslim community, urban community, and rural communities, because we were experimenting. We meaning they did it, I didn't do it. To make sure, do we have something here? Again, this same pattern, is it working? Why is it working? And it did. And in some villages, no girl was circumcised the following year. And this program was spread to 5 different governorates, 5 provinces in Egypt. And then the government learned about it and actually started Egypt-wide abandonment program, because this showed them that you could advocate at the grassroots level. And they did a national program, keeping this PD, finding people who are different with a good outcome, keeping that component as one strategy. And it's been working. I went back so that was 97, 98. I went back in 2005 when it was going full swing, and many people. The first time we had to hide in a monastery to do this, it was so dangerous. And then they came back and people were meeting and talking so openly. So huge change, maybe also cultural change. Currently, I don't know what's going on. I would be curious to find out. I don't know. So I don't know what's going on with that one. Any question on this particular case? No? Okay.
So there was not any obstacle in some villages? People saying, no, we don't want this change, and it seems very...
No, very difficult.
Yeah.
No. So then the NGO, who are the people with the problem, acted their way. They actually then developed new strategy based on what they had learned from these people, and also brought these people to testify, to give their testimony to a large group of people. And so that really changed some people's mind, because again, before there were very few people who were hearing from experts, don't do this, don't do that. But this time it was their neighbors who were willing to come and tell their own story. So very powerful. Social proof that somebody just like me is doing something different. Because many women would not like to get their daughters circumcised, but let's say they're coerced by social norm. That's what we do. We are Egyptian. That's what we do. But when they see somebody doing something different, they say, maybe I can stop as well. So that's the way it spread. So new advocacy strategy that were enriched by what they learned from those people who said no. So like marketing, I mean, there were some words that they use, and each region in Egypt, Arabic, I mean, there are always local terms that make it more powerful. So there was a lot of messages. Like what God has created, you cannot destroy, is one thing that people say. When I said that, some people say, speaking of Allah, you cannot, everybody believes through the religious message was actually very powerful, or other term that they used.
May I ask one question? This is a very important question for Egypt, and nowadays, like, they're literally fighting, I think, like, through the government as well. My question will be, I'm Turkish and we don't have this issue, but we have different issue for the young marriage, like childhood marriage. And when you wanted to fight against this as an NGO, you will firstly meet with the violence through the people, like mostly the men in this village. So it will be very hard to get into this village to try to change something. And first of all, the women also, they're not going to be happy to talk to you because they will be literally get out of the community. So did you any of these, like during your work, did you try to communicate with the religious people, the powerful men figures in the community, or how they were their reaction? Do they accept it to change or not? Because I don't know if you watched the movie What Happened in Afghanistan, explaining Osama, like a child got married at 12 years old and died, and there's a really good story telling how a woman or how a female trying to grow up in this religious environment, but at the end you're always facing with the religious men, not the religious woman, like religious men who make the decisions. So did you experience this? I would really like to learn about it.
Maybe in Pakistan, working in Pashtun community. So first of all, yeah, you always start, I'm not there, a local NGO, somebody who start the process. And it's the same in hospital, by the way, because there's always hierarchy everywhere. If you work in organization, there's always a hierarchy. You always start with the top, with the most influential people. But the way we do this, I like you to ask these questions, because we always phrase it, first of all, as an invitation. First of all, people come to us. I don't proselytize about this approach ever. I can't market it because otherwise I become an expert. I have a product to sell. So there's no marketing ever of this approach. People come to it. But also in Pakistan, for instance, the way you phrase and reframe the problem is very important. You have to find a definition of problem that the leadership, men, in this case in Pashtun community in Pakistan, northern Pakistan, was that men wanted to solve that problem. If we had said, are you interested in improving or saving the lives of women in your village, women in labor, when safe motherhood, do you want to do that? They're not interested because women are negligible, they're nothing. But if we did ask them if they were interested in the survival of their newborn, men said, oh yes. And why? Because we have many of our children, newborn, who die within 25 days or under 40 days, over 25, many. We had one last week or last month, or my niece, my nephew. So men in that particular category, leaders, evidently, you always go through the leadership. They say, actually, we are interested in solving this problem. So actually, women are not involved first. It's men to men. We always respect culture. So in that particular project, men was with the facilitator or catalyst was a man and a woman. You never try to transgress the statu quo in that sense, or the cultural situation. You just go through it. But they said they wanted to get they want to find a way. And when they were asked, would you be interested in finding the solution within your village? Finding solution to this problem right here in this village, they were absolutely, they say, of course, we would love for this to happen. So the invitation, are they interested? Would they like to do it? But also reframing the problem to make sure that there's motivation to want to change it. So that's enough on that one. Yeah? Bon.
So Monique said it's
Am
not
I
about...
answering your question in some ways? Because then the story goes that actually men, it's amazing what happened there. But.
So it's not about us, it's about them, the way the facilitators are trained by Monique and Jerry, and the way they discover through the community. So I had the privilege to interview Mohamed Shafiq, who worked with Monique in the Pakistani case, and we wanted to share with you some amazing positive deviant behaviors and the way to diffuse them within the community. And it will answer a part of your question.
I think in Pakistan, most of the mothers, they throw the colostrum, which is very important. They throw it away and they think that this is bad, this is yellowish, this is not good for the baby, and it's not, it may be harmful for the baby. So they throw it away. But we found a positive deviance role model mother-in-law who, instead of throwing it away, she's told her daughter-in-law that give it to the baby because this is the first gift of God for the baby, and how can we refuse the first gift of the God? And that was a very important quotation which we use during the health education sessions, and we engage other mother-in-laws. What do you think about that? So, and then people were really surprised to know that. So we use this as one of the key message, and then it really helped to change the behaviors. And we learned after some time that majority of the people, they were giving colostrum to the babies. Another important thing is that in our part of the world, especially in Pakistan, when a newborn is born, within half an hour we have to give azan in the ear of the newborn to inform him that he is born in a Muslim family. So most of the people, they believe that the baby, when he is born, she is born, is not clean. So they wash the baby within half an hour, which is very dangerous for the baby newborn, because hypothermia is one of the killer of the newborn. So we found a father, who when the baby was born, who asked the family, who told the family that okay, just clean the baby without washing, and I will azan in the ear of the baby. And then when we ask, when people ask, no, we have to wash it because it's not clean. Then what he said, no, baby is already clean because he's coming from the womb of the mother. So he was already clean there. And the second thing is that sometime because we hear azan 5 times a day from the mosque, and sometimes we are just walking, we are sitting, we are sleeping, we are eating, and sometimes we are in the washroom. So we don't need to be clean all the time. Same with the baby. And baby is already clean because coming from the womb of the mother. So this was a very important statement. Then what we did, we also during the health education session, we also invited the religious leader to sit there and validate this information. So when he shared the behavior, there were people who asked questions, and then the religious leader was sitting there, and he also validated that yes, when you hear azan, sometimes you are walking, sometimes you are doing things, you are working, so it is okay. So this is how we try to address those issues which were related to the culture, to the tradition, and to the religious, but in a way which did not threaten the mobilization process, in a way that even strengthened the mobilization process. So as you know that in Pakistan especially, pregnancy and delivery is considered a female domain. So only mother-in-law is in charge of all the things, and the men are totally, they are kept away, and they keep themselves away because they think, oh, this is female business. But during the process, we found an excellent positive deviant person, a role model. He was a father, and he was very excited when he learned that he will be becoming a father, after 9 months. So from the very beginning, he started preparing something for the delivery, because he knew that delivery is a risk, and there should be something already prepared in advance, that if something happens, they could have enough money to take the mother to the health facility. So he started chipping in some money, he started saving some money, and at the 9th month he had enough money. Another very interesting thing what he does is that usually when there is a delivery, people, they even, sometimes they are playing with their friends, and sometimes they just keep, their routines, like if they're working, they just go to the office. But what he did, he didn't go anywhere. He was waiting for that day, and that day he went to call the traditional birth attendant, And when she came, to his home, he did two things. He already had bought a new clean razor blade, and also he had a soap. So he gave the blade to the traditional birth attendant and said, make sure that only use this blade to cut the cord. Most of the people, we learned that they were using bamboo stick to cut the cord, because cutting cord with the bamboo stick is traditional way of doing things, and they feel that this is the better way and the baby will heal soon. But this was the first positive deviant who said, no, this is very important that the cord is cut with the new razor blade so that there's no infection. And the second thing, he told to the traditional birth attendant before she was entering the room that please, you have to wash your hand in front of me. I really want to see. He was very assertive, and that was something different. People, they do not do that, and they do not dare to do that, because traditional birth attendants are very, senior, kind of a person in the village. So then she washed the hands, and then she went and entered the room, and then she did and used the new and clean razor blade. So these were really interesting positive deviance behavior, which we, after learning, then we shared with other community members for the next 1 year. And after the year, when we did the evaluation of NN survey, we found some significant changes in using antenatal care practices, postpartum care practices, using new clean blade to cut the cord, and also giving colostrum to the newborn baby.
So to answer your question, the people transgress the taboo or the way things are done. Same in organizations, where there's a problem with behavior. I don't know example in business, but the people who are most successful at overcoming a very complex problem, usually they do something different against the rule, against the protocol. And there will be a story of a guy in the US on hospital-acquired infection. There are lots of, the more expert-driven we are, our world, we have a lot of protocol, a lot of rules. But actually, even in the Merck example, pharmaceutical Merck, you know that company, when they use this particular approach in Mexico, they found that, so it was about the sale of Fosamax. Fosamax is a drug for, I forget what it's for.
Osteoporosis.
Huh?
Osteoporosis.
Osteoporosis. Bon. So, first of all, when the leadership, the marketing, the director of sale invited all the managers all over Mexico, which is 21 of them, to come together. And he proposed, he said, they were the last. They were ranking last in the sale of Fosamax, so they weren't doing well at all, and there was a lot of pressure from the top to change the situation. So when they were asked by the leadership to what they were thinking about it, would they be willing to try something, they didn't believe it, because the culture, they always told what to do. They were very suspicious, and what are they thinking? They're asking us our opinion, they're asking us if we want to use this PD business to find solution to our sale, the dramatic drop of sales of this Fosamax thing, so they were suspicious. But some of them, only a few, tried. And they did go and find out, because they could find out through data, the sale people who were doing very well despite the rest of the sale people doing very poorly. But when they went, they found that, each company have their marketing secrets. They have that they keep very close to their chest. And their golden rules, I guess, in marketing, the way you suppose, at Merck, they have the 7 golden rules to sell their products. Well, the people who were doing differently, they were different from they were not applying the rules, if you will. It's the same with this Pakistani story. The men, on the men's side, who had babies who survived, because we look at babies who survived despite having a series of difficult situations, at-risk babies that survived, particularly girls that survive, since girls are of lesser importance in that culture. But when the father said what they said, this is against his culture. This is against the tradition for a man to look after his wife. Maybe some of them took their wife to the health center for medical checkup. And this is something that's not done. Men's world and women's world are separate, and if you transgress that, you will be the laughing stock of your peers, of the men, and you live with men. You cannot be ostracized from your community. But because this process that Shafiq described was done with the leaders, with everybody, all the influential people there, and the result of his transgressing was linked to a better outcome. We didn't look at determinant factor. What made this man buy a razor blade, a clean razor blade to cut the umbilical cord? We don't go into that. We just look at what he did, he or she or they do, with a good outcome. And because of the good outcome, the leadership then said this is very important behavior. Now the question that Benedict asked, so we know, so people have different behavior that lead to a better outcome. So how do you share it? How do you make people adopt this behavior? Do we tell other men, this is what you need to do? They will be up in arms. So I'll go quickly because we have other things to do. It's already 10 minutes away. You're losing. Okay.
10 minutes left, so, yeah.
They just asked the men, what do you think should be done? So they were all amazed of what those few men were doing, and they decided themselves what they would do. And they said, we should go to the tea shop in our neighborhood, mohalla. So in our own division, you can take this as a metaphor for what could happen in an organization or a business. They said, what we need to do is take all the men who are married, but I think, and they said, some of them said, we should also take young men who are going to be married, and we should bring them together, we should have conversation at the tea shop, not just tell them what to do, but they had what they call a bazaar. They organized a bazaar when they would ask the men, okay, bring what you think is needed for a delivery. All deliveries happen at home. So they would actually bring what they think is useful, and they would compare and decide what is the best clean delivery kit that should be used. So again, they created activity to learn and practice new behavior. Any question on that? Because we're going far from your world, in Pakistan and Egypt. So what do we do now?
What we wanted it to express three main cases that allowed positive deviance to become an approach that have been used in more than 100 missions. The case we talked about, which was Merck, is interesting. In fact, Benedict asked us to talk a little more about the business application. Merck case was, Fosamax was an osteoporosis medicine. It was really, really great compared to the competition. But in the worldwide situation, it was only $3.5 billion revenue, which was not as good as the executive wanted it to be. So in Latin America, we had a big issue. And Gray Warner, which was the
regional
top executive,
CEO,
for Latin America, he invited Jerry, and because for the past 2.5 years, he didn't find any solution. They tried everything, training, coaching, best practices, Six Sigma, everything from all the best consulting firm and training firm in the world. And Merck is a very top-down, so management knows best. And for the first time, Gray Warner, he thought we need to change things, we need to change the behavior. And they invited Jerry, and Jerry made an invitation. He presented the approach as Monique is doing just right now. And they asked, do you want to do this approach? Do you want to test it? So all the country leaders were over there. And from all the countries in Latin America, everybody said no. but one, Andreas Brozauer, who was head of sales and marketing in Mexico, because it was the worst year ever. And we talked about infant malnutrition, we talked about a lot of life and death situation, but over there it was about jobs. His jobs and his 250 people. So what he did the same thing, an invitation, he presented the approach, and within the 20 managers of the district, because it's a very community-based approach, the first say no, the second say no, and they only 5 people say yes, we want to do that. And despite all the hours of work that they had, they visited 75% of all the sales rep over there, 224. They identified 15 people with amazing behaviors, and from the 15 positive deviants that they identified, 12 were replicable, because if they are artists or born salesmen, we can't really use that. And from the 12, they found a series of behaviors. So it would be the step where everybody would stop, which is Six Sigma. We are looking for best practices, and then we will enforce them through training and magnificent PowerPoints. But the basis of the approach is discovering by the people and diffused by the people. So they invited the 200 guys in Mexico, and they presented the best practices, and they presented them with a choice. Which one do you want to use? Which was the first time, and they looked at their eyes like, what is it? Is it the last flavor of the month? It is a trick. And they identified a couple of behaviors. The 12 people discussed with all the other reps, and in more than, I think it was 7 or 8 months after the beginning of the process, they increased all the sales revenues. The 15 districts who were really below 30% below, which is quite low from Merck perspective, they came back at an average level. The next year, because it is a sustainable process, it was the exceptional practices became business as usual behaviors. The sustainable results came above 30%, and they became the number 1 Phosomax sales country in the world for the next 5 years. So it was an amazing case, but because Merck is very management know best, it was only Merck Mexico, and it never led to other country positive deviance approaches. So it is quite important to feel that it is extreme situations with not quick fix, which are looked at by the leaders, and very sustainable solution on the behavioral side. So that's why I love this approach, and we worked as a dozen of person in Europe with Monique, because extreme situation, creating autonomy, looking through behaviors which are already existing right now. We don't need to buy something, we don't need to invent something. It's not what if we could do something, it's what is already there. But the big issue on all the problems we had is how to diffuse them. And if we try to do that with a top-down approach, a consulting approach, it's dead. And we've got several cases about that.
So it didn't work.
So for us, it was about presenting this case, and I think that Monique will conclude with your question about which might be different from other cases that you, or other approaches like appreciative inquiry or Six Sigma. It is interesting, but not the solution. When you are using it, when it is problem which is for the executive, but which is not a problem from the community, it doesn't work, because the community must grasp the problem, discover by themselves, and diffuse them by themselves with a feedback loop which is data-driven. And at HEC Alumni, we are working with other BCG, McKinsey. A lot of colleagues are working for large consulting firms with NGO too, and it is one of the rare approach that is working really well only on this specific topic. In 90% of the cases, a top-down approach or a best practices approach is working, and we are not relevant. The last point is Monique told us something about consulting. It is, if you are really great, you become irrelevant. You are not used and you are not useful anymore because the community became autonomous. They created autonomy. So, which is a big problem for consultancy because we need to bring business each year and each year. So, turning to the NGO process, to the big corporation process, is something that we've did in France, in pharmacy, in cosmetics, in insurance. When we've got innovative leaders that become facilitators and with an experienced people, and that's what we wanted to present with you today. Do you want to conclude about the global approach?
I don't know. Do they have questions? They're tired after 2 hours like this. Some reactions, yeah, or I don't know. Yes?
I have a question that it's connected to this issue. So, if I understood correctly, this is scientifically and data-based approach, and the methodology demonstrates very good results in all the projects that are being implemented. Now, my question is, why is this not used as a policy tool? Because even if the problems are not technical, as you said before, problems that have technological solutions can be tackled through social mechanisms. And several times what happens is that the technological solution is way too expensive. So through change in social behavior, a better solution can be found. So I was just wondering, why is it that this is not explored at that level, at the same time at the business level maybe? And yeah.
Yeah, I don't know either. There's one case where they used it at policy level in healthcare because they're more advanced. They've been using it in healthcare, so maybe somebody got the confidence to try it on policy regarding patient safety. Just a side comment on this. Sometimes by doing this process, by using this approach, there is behavior, social change, and policy change, which we saw in a few use of the PD approach, let's say with girl trafficking in East Java. They actually changed the policy they had in the government following a minor, somebody with under 18 who goes out of the village, how to actually, they changed the policy. So the project influenced policy, but you're right, there are very few examples, to my knowledge, of using PD at policy level. PD is a bit local, so I don't know if you can take it at the macro level. There's a few organizations, the World Bank and WHO, when we looked at polio eradication, who looked at, they took like 3 or 4 countries that had similar situation, and then one country had a better outcome. It's very hard because you have to compare apples with apples. You cannot maybe go to that level of abstraction or, general level, yeah? But it's something that is going to be explored because there'll be a global conference next year. And because the World Bank, I'm not working at the level of abstraction, but that's okay, I'm irrelevant to this. But some people are thinking of using it at policy level, but I don't know of example of that, of the use for policy yet.
Just that conference that will happen will be next year?
Yes, spring of next year. So it's been 25 years, and again, that was our marketing policy, was no marketing. Because this is different. It's not, if we market the brand for this positive deviant, and we could because it's successful, it's used in many areas, we would become like any other brand. We would be another Six Sigma, another. package solution. But because in this approach, the solutions come from within, we chose to make it open source and that anybody can use it. So it's been growing organically over the last 25 years. It's not a good business plan for sure, but it's taught at universities, books have been written. So in a way, you know, I can say my job is done because in a way it's been enrolled as a good at one of those behavior change and social change methodology. So it's been accepted among the pantheon of whatever those methodologies are. But maybe it's time to connect dots, different types of dots, you know, sectorial, but also through, I work a lot with UN organizations and, you know, business. So we're going to bring everybody together. That'll be interesting. Because there's a lot going on in that, using this approach. A lot of books have been written, or people write a chapter on positive deviance in their books.
I had a question. It's more, we were talking about politics. And my question is, there is a city in France, which is a quite sinister city from the mining industry, which is Los-en-Goël, who perform very well because they managed to leverage on their past mining history and to make it an asset to attract the new green eco-building industry and clusters, and they have all the investments from the EU and the French government. And now it's been about 15 years, so the unemployment rate were very high, and they managed to attract new high-value industries, so to say. And so now they're kind of a green between in their area, which is the Nord-Pas-de-Calais, and they leverage it by partnering with Jeremy Rifkin, and they are launching now a project which is the third industrial revolution in Nord-Pas-de-Calais. And I was wondering, now ADEME, which is the French National Agency for Environment, is trying to analyze what they have done and how they did it to see if you could spread this out all over France. And I was wondering if that also could be considered as positive deviance, whereas it's not a social group, but it's a city. Because this could be a way to make the bridge with how politicians or politics could take advantage of that method. But I'm not sure.
Are they different in Pas-de-Calais from all other places in France? Do you have indicators of success that would be very different? So in the data, retention of staff, of employees, maybe even hiring more people, adhering to the green environment charter.
They're attracting people who are willing to live in their city. That makes the prices increase, whereas in the other towns in the area, prices are decreasing. But when you look at the employment rate, it's not that. You cannot be sure that it has not destroyed jobs in the cities around them. So I don't.
But I think it's a good case of worst case. It was very difficult.
And that it was successful in, I don't know what your indicators of success for this, but it's possible. Okay, so there's two ways. The ways that everybody does, and I have a hard time with it because for quality control, which is my role a little bit on this particular approach, is they like to do a sort of study. Okay, this Pas-de-Calais, it's one city in Pas-de-Calais? Yeah. It's different from all other cities in whatever thing. So usually experts will come and find out what is it. You can have a case study, which is the first thing concept, well, they're positive deviant in our jargon. Fine, and you can find what makes them different and how they dealt with regular challenges and barriers and problems. I don't know, syndicat, union, the way they apply all the legislation, there's a lot of regulation and stuff, right?
I think all the decisions will with the inhabitants. They take all the decisions with the inhabitants. And so they also encourage people to ask what they need, and if they need something, the municipality, the town hall, the municipality gives the money, and then it's up to the people to implement it.
Mm-hmm. So there are very specific, different, and successful strategies. So the first one way is to go and study what they do and come out with those. That's what they do differently. The way the approach works is a bit different, more elaborate, is that you would bring people, so civil society, all the intervenants, all the stakeholders in cities, worst case scenario cities. You bring the mayor, you bring the industry people, the chambre de commerce, whatever, I don't know, because it's not my field. But all those people have to, they're exposed to the approach, and you bring them to talk to their own counterparts. They create their own observation, and they go and discover what works. If they do that, it's a bit more elaborate, but you take 2 or 3 cities within the Pas-de-Calais who are really have this entrenched, chronic, difficult problem, to come and look. But you cannot say just go and you dummies do like them, because they are, we're not the same. There's a yeah but syndrome, which we have a lot in fact. Yeah, but it's not going to work here because we're different. Yeah, but so we have an immune system rejection of what is foreign, not on the lecture level, you know, the books we read, all the theory that comes into our head. But when it comes to doing it, we say, oh no, we can't do it here because we're different. So to overcome that problem, you want to bring the people who are similar, who are cities or groups of people who are in a similar situation, to find the solution from people just like them, because they share the same DNA. There won't be a rejection of the immune system saying, oh yeah, but because they are going to create tools and discover what works. You can do it. I mean, and I'm sure they would, all the things that you said are different and work, the new strategy, a different policy, maybe differently, a way to apply, implement legislation, or the concertation, the way they do concertation. It's not that they do it, because everybody does concertation. Everybody sometimes talks, but how you do it, it's the how. All this will be learned, discovered by these people, and they will adapt them to their own situation. So that's the approach. So the difference between the two, both. Il dit ça suffit, ça suffit. Je sais, je vois là aussi. You must be tired, guys. Anyway, there's literature available. If you look at websites, there's a lot.
Okay, I think it's time to conclude. And thank you. I really want to thank you, Monique, for sharing your experience in a such lively way, and Gregory for having prepared all this with Monique. It was really interesting, at least for me, and I think also for the students. For me, it helps me look at the problems, I think, with different glasses, and it's what what we need, I think, to do, and we better understand the importance of social behaviors as a key point for, you know, trying to solve big problems, poverty issues, and things like that, and I like the idea of identifying transgressive actors in the different communities, and communities can be villages, can be businesses, can be cities, can be business schools, why not? And,
exactly. Business school
I think we could think about it for HEC, for example. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Good luck. Good luck.
Great. My name is Mark Munger. I've been a management consultant, and in this engagement I was working with Valaicon Management Consulting, which asked us to work on a problem with Johnson & Johnson in Europe, EMEA, where there was a chronic and increasing problem of very high potential younger women leaving EMEA, women in whom the organization had invested a great deal of time and money and effort and training, regarding as high potential and regarding as really the future of J&J in Europe. J&J has a long and proud history of applying ethical criteria to its work. It has a credo that's on the walls in the history in New Brunswick about the way it treats people. And many people in Johnson & Johnson were quite distressed that these young women were leaving. Many of the senior people, from very senior women in New Jersey to very senior women in Europe, but their distress was shared by their male counterparts. And so they asked us to help them understand what was going on and possibly to suggest a solution. And we had the liberty of working with very competent colleagues internally in J&J, and we proposed a different way of looking at it. Instead of wondering why the women were leaving, could we try to ascertain why the women might be staying? And what is it that the women who were staying, what did they do differently from the women who left? Which began a series of many interviews ranging from the Scandinavian countries all the way to Greece and into North Africa, in which we tried to ask questions that would assist these women in making a diagnosis about what enabled them to commit themselves to J&J when many of their peers were leaving. And the self-reports, and actually backed up by considerable data by their supervisors, performance reviews, and by other things, is the women who stayed had a perhaps different mindset than the women who were leaving. One, they felt that they could make their own way in the corporation as it existed because they did a couple of things differently. One is that they made aggressive efforts to network with other women, not just to talk about gender-specific issues, but to talk about overall performance issues and solve problems that they faced in common with the business in Europe. They also made an effort to form professional relationships with their male peers to help them solve problems, and also with their male supervisors. And one particular nuance is that they asked for help. And they didn't ask for help in a way that made them seem weak or ill-equipped, but they asked for strong help and developed, if you will, psychological contracts with the men with whom they worked. And they were fairly tough-minded negotiators. They said, look, in effect, if you expect me to be successful, these are the resources that I need, and this is the kind of support system I want, and this is the kind of influence I expect to have. Why am I not at that table? I should be at that table. But they were quite diplomatically skilled in their way to do that, and they sometimes compared notes with their more senior female and male counterparts to do that. One of the things that emerged from this was a thought that a couple of preliminary efforts to have women come together had been quite successful. And so there was an intention made to create a program for women to join and share their perspectives. There was a little bit of doubt about whether programs work in terms of organizational and cultural change, but they decided to experiment. And they searched for help throughout leading European business schools as a venue to explore some of the professional development issues these women had. And they finally decided that it was insufficient. Even some of the most prestigious European schools seemed either disinterested or what they offered was insufficient. So they went to the University of Cape Town in South Africa and began a week's program, which they later expanded with J&J operations in other countries. But they figured that South Africans had made a real effort to deal with diversity and issues of diversity, and they might learn there. So they brought a problem-centered approach. They learned a little bit from their South African counterparts, but they also brought real-life case studies which they began to work on in groups and come up with non-traditional solutions, not just to helping women stay retained in J&J, but progress, to make progress. This led to an invitation to the bosses, to the supervisors of the women who were invited. And they said, you're a team really, and you need to come work and learn to do some team building. And some of the men were reluctant to go, but they decided this might be a very interesting innovation because some of the men were flummoxed how they helped women, and they thought that they could go and learn perhaps to be more adept or more facile in helping the women who reported to them. So subordinate and supervisor went to South Africa. They had very engaging encounters there with their peers and solved some problems. One of the suggestions that came out of the South African experience was that men might be evaluated on how sufficiently they help to mentor women who work for them. There are some men who are quite good at being mentors, and there are other men who did not take it seriously or lack the skills to do it. And they decided that this might even float up to a policy level where part of the men's performance review might be the track record of the women who had worked for them. That generalized into track record of all people who work for them, men and women, but it began with looking at women, so it began to develop coaching skills, if you will, for the supervisors. There is some question for a male supervisor, why am I going to be evaluated on what women do after they work with me? And I may not be responsible for them. I look at the raw material, I look at the challenging context. Why should I be held accountable for that? And so the question was, are there any male supervisors just like you who all of a sudden have found ways to help their female proteges or their female subordinates advance? And the answer is yes. And that led then to an inquiry about what did those men do that women reported as being useful for them in mentoring behavior. Once there was a discovery that perhaps I, as a less experienced or less sophisticated male boss, could improve the level of my game in helping my female subordinates advance and solve problems in this culture, then the resistance that I initially experienced began to dissipate. This was 10 years ago. I should say as a caveat that I am not current in my knowledge of what's going on there, but I have heard just last month that not only does this effort continue, but it has a broad graduate network, and it has connected women and men to help each other navigate some of the business changes for J&J in Europe, and has been seen as not only making J&J more resilient, but making J&J more nimble and more facile in dealing with changing business environments.
Hello all, I'm Nobu, I come from Japan. I'm going to talk about a case which was delivered by my friend who is a kind of a Kali consultant. This is a case about salespeople at medical device company in Japan. And obviously, as a sales-oriented project, the topic of the project was focusing on how much salespeople can sell. And of course, the tendency is to look at the top players. We have identified that those top players, they were like born salespeople. Someone's like artist. So we decided this is something quite difficult to replicate. But meantime, when we look at the population, there was a kind of a second group, which is not necessarily bad, because second group, which is producing a stable performance, always producing profit under whatever conditions, we thought this is a group of people that we should be looking at. Now that we get into those groups, we have identified some of the people who were quite responsive to the customer's request. The traditional belief in this sales organization is when a customer asks information to sales, they always wanted to do something perfect. So Mr. Customer, okay, I'm going to produce a perfect file in 2 weeks, and then never responded about the status of the information to the customer. This is about the ordinary salespeople. The group that we have identified as a second group, but who was performing great consistently, they were the ones who were responsive to the customer request immediately following the next day. Hey, Mr. Customer, this is a portion of information that you requested me yesterday. I'm just going to send it to you. Another portion could come in 1 week, and then perfect, a suite would be ready in 2 weeks. And then the next week, hey, this is the remaining piece, and then in 2 weeks they produced what was required by the customer. In this way, we have identified a different behavior which was believed differently by the group of a traditional group of salespeople, which was not really performing quite well.
also we have identified this group of people were not judgmental in terms of who is the stakeholder in that organization. They were the ones who were trying to be responsive and friendly to all those people at the customer place, including assistant or secretary. Later, probably it's difficult to reason it so logically, but later we found that all those multiple stakeholders were involved in the decision-making processes. So we thought that would be probably something different. So this way we have identified a group of positively deviant behaviors, but how we can replicate this to the rest of the organization was another challenge, because those people who believe that the perfect information or just to decide on one or two single stakeholder is important was the belief. And so we created a place where we can involve all those people, introduce the new ways, and the turnover of the salespeople, sales reps in this company was quite high. So taking advantage, we invited those newcomers and then explained this is something that looks like a functioning. So those people coming as a new sales person to this company, who was not biased so much by the company, a norm yet, they decided to take up some of the tools, some of the ways, and then those people started performing much better than those people remaining in this company a longer time. And this way, the group of new people started performing. The traditional people started getting a bit of interest and also get a bit of pressure because they are at the organization longer than those people. Now that maybe this is something I could do too, and then they started gradually mimicking or replicating what we have identified as a set of behaviors. So that is the story from Japan.
So I'm Lars Thursen from Denmark. When I initiated the positive deviance approach in the Danish Prison and Probation Service, I was the innovation director, and we were facing a lot of problems from the politicians, from the unions, facing a bad working environment, high numbers of absenteeism among staff. So we needed to do something seriously about it. And our problem definition in the central office was a managerial agenda. So we did a lot of things and tried a lot of things, but it didn't really work. We couldn't really solve the problems. And then I got acquainted with the positive deviance approach. And then I thought, well, maybe we could try that because we have tried a lot of other things that didn't work. So what we actually were looking for, and we engaged in an inquiry process with the guards, later on with the inmates, showed to be very, very useful. I will tell you a very brief story. When we talked with the guards, we found out that there were some guards that actually behaved differently from the others. There was one female guard who, when you, as an inmate, when you need to get out of your cell, you need to press a bell. And the bell is usually ringing in the guard's room. And the common behavior would be that it would be kind of an interruption because they would be in the middle of doing something else, some casework, eating together, chatting together, drinking coffee. But this female guard, she thought, well, the bell is ringing, so I better get up quickly. So she got up, and she was doing a little bit of noise with the keys when she entered the hall and went down to the cell. She was actually knocking the door, and she was waiting a little bit. She was opening the door slowly, and then she asked, well, what can I do for you? So when we talked with the inmates about that, they said this is a totally different way of connecting in a very gentle, human way. So they said, well, I would actually like to talk more with her. What was really interesting when we got to know her and talked with her was that, of course, this is a very simple, banal behavior. But what happened was that we found out that she also experienced less threats and violence than the other guards. So she was deviant in that way, positively. She didn't experience so many situations where you fixate people and use constraints. And she was happy at work, she came to work, she was not so absent. So in that way, she was having a good working life, meaningful working life, and the inmates thought so too. So the inmates engaged with her. They wanted to talk with her. They wanted to talk about competence development, training, and so on. So it was also a re-socialization process for the inmates. So you could say this female guard, she was of course successful in her own way, but she was also solving the problem of the central office with the absenteeism, bad working environment, etc. So once we found her, we tried to get her to tell her story. That was a little bit difficult because she didn't want to stand up and talk about it. But we helped with that and facilitated a process with that. And so the others, just like her, the peers, the other guards, could actually learn from it. It took a lot of time to build trust in the system because people are not used to talking about serious matters. It's a little bit of a macho culture, so in the beginning just to get the guards to talk together was a challenge, but we used a lot of time and effort in doing that. After a while, we included, or they decided to include the inmates because they found out that a lot of this has actually to do with the relationship between the inmates and the guards. So they got to be part of the conversation, part of the inquiry process, and so on. So it was really turning from an HR problem to a community problem-solving process, you could say.
I'm Jane Lewis. I am a graduate of the HEC Oxford CCC programme, on which I learnt about positive deviance and have since been using it in my professional career extensively with behaviour change. The first project that I worked on was mentored by Jerry Sternin, the originator of PD, and it was about a persistent problem in Hertfordshire Adult Care Services. Hertfordshire Adult Care Services had a real issue because the presenting problem was that people were not filling in care records. This was costing them a lot of money, it was costing a lot of problems, and they had hired data quality managers to keep people filling the forms in, which they didn't, and there was 40% compliance at the time. They tried all many different kinds of things. They'd had lean done to them, all the processes had been improved, and the behaviour hadn't changed. So one of my contacts had heard about positive deviance and thought it might be worth a go. It took quite a lot of work with leaders and staff to get there, but we moved ahead and created a project where people in the organisation themselves, a diagonal slice from the administrators through to team leaders, defined their side of the problem with the permission of leaders. Their side of the problem was that they weren't filling the care records in because they didn't have time. And if they didn't have time, because 80% of the time was spent doing admin, but the admin didn't seem to be the care records. So, following the PD process, we said, okay, in that case you need some data about the time issue. How are you going to collect it? Because it's important that they did. So they defined a way of collecting data about the time. They got people to fill in their own design of time log, and they looked at the results. The results showed that actually they didn't spend 80% of their time doing admin, they spent 30% of their time doing admin. But they also discovered something that wasn't explicit, that many people were spending a further 30% of their time answering the phone from people whose relatives were should have been in the system, asking about where they were. This was not productive. The social workers didn't know all the cases because the care records weren't filled in, and there was all sorts of problems around that. So, however, they did also find from the data that there were people that didn't have the phone problem, and what they did was to ask them how they managed this. And it was a very simple solution, that the team that didn't have the problem wrote to everybody who's been assessed for referrals into the service to tell them how long it would take and what the steps were before they would be seen and before they would get their service. And as a result, they had less than 30% of the problems. So they adopted this procedure across the rest of the organisation, and the time taken, the 30%, dropped significantly. The other thing that they did was to give the call handling to an administrator who knew a lot about all of the issues because they were at the centre, whereas previously the social workers had handled the issue. This freed up the social workers significantly to be able to go and do more work during the course of the working day. And there were other behaviours discovered in the way that the records were actually kept by the people who did keep them. And one of the key learning points was for the people that despite the fact that they had been told by management that filling in care records was important, they still weren't doing it. But they learnt for themselves the enormous amount of wasted time that not filling the care records actually created. So their behaviour changed, and they saved up to 2 hours per person per week simply by doing this, and they recovered the cost of my facilitation and training with the group more than tenfold in the course of the first year. So it was seen to be a successful project.
So 19 years ago, my wife and I were blessed with our second son. And I say blessed because he came under very difficult circumstances. He was born at 28 weeks. He was 678 grams. He had multiple surgeries. He was in the children's hospital under the care of hundreds, maybe even thousands of healthcare workers for about 2 years when he first came home. And during this difficult and blessed time, my wife and I came across a few healthcare providers who stood out in a way that we remember them and what they did even as of today. So, for instance, there was this neonatologist who did his rounds in a very different way. There were about a dozen neonatologists, and the typical way in which rounds are done in a neonatal intensive care unit is, people come, white coats, they crowd around a little, incubator, and they read the chart very quickly, they make some quick decisions, and they move. And as a parent, as a caregiver, you're behind. And you may have a question. The question is always the same, how's my child doing? But you probably don't get a chance to even ask that question. Now, this neonatologist was different. How was he different? When he would come with his team of interns and fellows and residents, they would bring little stools and they would sit down, open their stools and sit down. And you can imagine what that does when doctors sit down. Time seems to slow down. I'm not in a hurry. I'm here. I'm caring for you. And this doctor would often begin by saying, Mr. and Mrs. Singhal, would you please join the circle? So we became part of the circle. And the question always was directed at the parents. The first question was, and how do you think, Mr. and Mrs. Singhal, given this is your child, and you have been watching over him for the past 24 hours, how is your child doing? And I think the quality of care outcomes for our son were fundamentally different by virtue of the fact that we were engaged in these kinds of conversations. So the practice that this neonatologist observed was not the norm. It was deviant from the norm, but it yielded very positive outcomes. In a similar vein, we had a pediatric anesthesiologist who, our son went through multiple surgeries and they were all phenomenal pediatric anesthesiologists, except this one had a different practice. When she came pre-op to see our son, she asked for permission to hold our baby. It's like, you want to hold our baby? Yes. And so she would pick up our son with all the tubes and hold them. And you can imagine a child is very calm when you hold them, as opposed to pinning them down so you could stick a needle or, do whatever procedure you needed to do. So this was deviant. It wasn't the norm. The norm was hold them down. She picked the child up. And as she picked the child up and administered what we often call verbal anesthesia, peekaboo, distracting the child, her assistant would find a spot where the needle at the first go could find the right place. And by the time the child realizes that the needle has gone in, they respond in a certain way, but then they are also in a position to be comforted right away. So that was different. And then I think the beauty of it from the perspective of a caregiver, a parent, is that when a child goes into an operation room, it's one of the most stressful moments of your life. There's always that sort of sinking feeling that he's going to be put to sleep and what's going to happen. So imagine what happens when the pediatric anesthesiologist asks for permission to carry the child to the operation theater. That's not the norm. The norm is to wheel them down. But imagine if she says, "May I have your permission to carry your child?" And as she's carrying the child to the operation theater, and as you're being comforted, she sort of looks back and she says to you with a nod, "He'd be okay." And what does it do to you as a parent when the anesthesiologist who's going to put them under and hopefully bring them out of it tells you that he'd be okay? So these are examples of positively deviant acts, small little things which make a big difference. Quality of care, clinical outcomes, as well as relational, 360-degree, ecological, caregiver, and ambience kinds of outcomes.
Okay, my name is Ahmed Güneş. I'm a PD practitioner. I work within the public sector and in the private sector with PD. In the public sector, I work with different ghetto areas within integration in Denmark. I also work with the educational system and how we can get low-income families and their children to get an education and go into the workforce in Denmark also. Actually, my journey started in the private sector. I'm a previous innovation and marketing manager for a couple of dealerships in southern Denmark. The case started with a service department. We have tried for almost 2.5 years using different methods to get this dealership working. The problem was that we had 6 dealerships. I've used best practice and other tools to get them be better in innovation and also in customer satisfaction, loyalty, performance, efficiency. And we were quite successful in 5 out of 6 of the dealerships. One of the dealerships we tried for 2.5 years, nothing worked. Lean, best practice, coaches, external consultants, everything. And actually they were really bad at customer satisfaction. We were one of the lowest in the rankings of these car brands. We were really bad at repairing cars. We made a lot of mistakes. We were quite slower than other guys. And also I had this turnover rate in the department because we have changed a lot of things. We have changed, okay, this doesn't work, we change a new service manager, we change a new parts manager, we change mechanics so we can fix the problem, but nothing actually worked. And I had this guy, a service director, the first sentence he started with was actually, he asked me, how many years have you been in the automotive industry? And I said, 2 years. And he said, okay, I've been here 25 years, so please just let me go and do my things, and you can do whatever you want because I know more than you do. And okay, he said, 2.5 years, we haven't actually accomplished anything with this department. So we said, okay, let's just forget all of the projects I've done, all the to-do list, all the checklists, all the policies that we made, and start from the scratch. Let's see. If we look at the customer satisfaction scores, we can see that usually we get quite low scores. But sometimes we actually have good scores. Like we have customers who are set 100 out of 100 in scores. So what actually happens? And we looked at the behavior and did it with the team. We found out that they did some quite interesting things. We have a parts manager who is quite good at diagnosing the customers' complaints. So he will always note what the customers were actually complaining about first, and then the ordinary service that they had to do from the brand. We had a technician out in the workshop who is actually calling the customers when the service department was not good enough in diagnosing the problems. He would call them by himself and ask them, okay, I'm actually working on your car right now, and I just want to be sure because I hear some noises. Is it this that you mean, or can I help you in another way? And did you forget anything that you would like me to do while the car is here? And we had this service manager who is quite good at explaining what was done on the car. So if you have a technician that explains specifically technically what the customers or the technician has done to the car to fix it, the customer don't understand anything, go out there, maybe pay 1,000 euro or 2, but without actually knowing what happened to the car. So a good way of explaining how you repair the car is actually some of the behaviors we found in this project. But we also did another way of working with this team. So we described dream scenarios, and one of the tasks was we have 6 problem areas that we want to describe dream scenarios on, but 5 of them they could describe. The 6th, they are not allowed to describe it. They had to tell it in another way. So they could sing it, they could dance it, they could draw it. And this guy in the beginning who said to me, you know what, I've been here 25 years, just leave. He was like standing up and did a rap about how you should actually do customer service. And I have this rap, I can send it to you also. And it changed the whole department. They went from being the lowest in customer satisfaction to be one of the best in Denmark in 9 months. But also 6 years later, they are still some of the best. So this is the sustainability of the behavior we found, and the taking the behavior and make it available for the larger group was a huge point in a sustainable way. Yeah. One thing that was quite interesting about this case was also that if you look at the customer satisfaction scores, some of the questions were this location of the department, how good is it? The customer satisfaction area, customer waiting area, how is it? The coffee machine and the toilet, how is it? All of those things actually did change in the survey. We didn't change anything about the location. It was the same place, but we went from being the really in the low end in Denmark to being some of the best locations in Denmark, and we didn't change anything, but it's about how you actually feel you're getting the service. And I've also tried to apply this method to other private sector companies with success, but also, of course, with failures. And one of the cases I've used is in the eBay sales force in Denmark, and we actually cut off the process quite a short time after we started it, because sometimes in the private sector there are companies or the management would like to see results quite quickly, so they want a quick fix in some way, because it's nice to just leave a check mark and say, yeah, I've done the project. But if you look for sustainable solutions, maybe it's not always good to just bring in best practice and quick fixes. So we discussed this and we started the project. So we tried to change the behavior around the system and the sales force, but due misunderstanding and not actually clearly discussing the expectations of the project, we stopped it 2 months in and actually left it without any ending to the project.
So my name is Andrej Findor, I work at the Comenius University in Bratislava, and I would like to share a story about Roma mayor of a small village, 800 people, whose name is Tivadar Berki, and the name of the village is Nitra nad Iplom. Nitra nad Iplom is in a southern part of central Slovakia. It is in the region in which there is almost 30% unemployment rate for the whole population. However, this is not the case in villages in which there is a majority of Roma population. In such villages, the unemployment rate sometimes is even 90%, 100%. Roma people in Slovakia are in a very difficult position. While many of them are fully integrated into Slovak society, there are still many marginalized Roma communities which live on the outskirts of villages and towns. And people who live there many times are the poorest of the poor, which you can find in Slovakia. These people live shorter, their children die more often. These people earn much less money as anyone else in Slovakia, and they are the ones who, in the eyes of many majority Slovaks, are the main beneficiaries of social assistance, despite of the fact that this, is not, it doesn't comply with the facts. There are many stereotypes and prejudices about Roma. Some of them being that they are lazy and that's why they don't want to work, and which leads them to receiving social assistance. Other being making Roma as some kind of like inherently criminal, committing crimes, not only stealing but also robbing and so on. Some of these mischiefs they are doing to your neighbors. And there is a lot of discrimination resulting against Roma, especially at labor market or access to healthcare. This village, Nitra nad Iplom, I would like to talk about, has a very interesting story because it is in the region with high unemployment, but despite of the fact, it defies any stereotype which one could have about Roma village, and which many people in Slovakia have. There is a public order, it's clean, children go to school and they don't drop out of the school, people have work, there is no crime. So if I told this to people in Slovakia, many of them would think this village must be from some other world. It cannot exist in Slovakia. And it's pretty interesting, to look at how the community in this village, led by a mayor, was able to achieve this. The first thing you notice when you come to Nitra nad Iplom is that everything is integrated in one place. There is a mayoral office, there is a school, there is a public toilet, there is a public grocery store, there are sports facilities, all in one place. By this sheer act of putting everything in one place, Mayor Berki and other members of the community managed to shrink the social distances which were many times separating its members from one another and from public institution, from mayor and from the community government. Second thing you will notice is that this place is exceptionally, even in the case of Slovak village standards, it's clean. So the public services work there. It's very well managed. It's a small village, only 800 people, but it looks like not only public services are working there, but people who live there have decent lives. And one of the ways how Mayor Berki was able to achieve this, again with the help of community members, was that when they had the public construction projects, he let the people who were in the most gregarious condition, the ones who needed it most, he let them build their own community flats, community houses. When you ask people in Slovakia, they will tell you many stories about Roma who received public flats or public houses and they destroyed them subsequently. But it is not the case in Nitra nad Iplom. And the one key difference being that these people built their own houses. They created something with their own hands, so they have, I think, big problems to destroy something they created themselves. Secondly, when they were building these public houses or public flats, they learned many valuable skills. Skills which can help them to get jobs at labor market. Because now their success rate in applying for jobs at construction site in Slovakia, but also in Czech Republic, got much higher. And that also could be credited to the way Mayor Berki approached the project of building public flats. Another important thing is that there was no crime in this village for 3 years. And when I asked Mayor Berki how did he achieve that, he said that they had people coming in the village in last years. Some of them, they even had a criminal record, they had a criminal past. But instead of putting them at margins of the village, they put them right in the center. So everyone could see them and they could see everyone. And he said that this mutual, checking out would lead them not to commit anything which would go against the public goodwill. Another thing which might not be that visible but which is astounding in a Slovak context is a 0% dropout rate in the school. And again, there one can see the genius of the mayor and of the community. One of the things being and keeping children in the school is that mayor himself prepares the breakfast for children. It's a small school, but by preparing breakfast, he creates this social relationship with parents, because parents know that mayor prepares personally breakfast for their kids. And secondly, it has been shown in cases in other countries. For example, there is a famous positive deviance case in Argentina with school retention, that giving breakfast to children makes them stay in school much more as giving them lunch. And of course, Mayor Berki didn't know about the case in Argentina. It was his instinctive choice, but thanks to breakfast, children stay in school, which again is something which goes against the stereotype of Roma children who drop out of the school. It is difficult to imagine how this deviant practice, deviant behaviors could be spread out, especially when I asked Mayor Berki why there are no other Roma villages following in their footsteps, you know. And he said when he tried to tell his colleagues from other villages and so on, they considered him to be a know-it-all, a smart ass. So, and they refrained from, you know, taking anything over. So what is crucial at this stage is to have an opportunity which would allow different municipalities to recognize on their own terms what Mayor Berki and what Nitra nad Diplom, what the community in Nitra nad Diplom is doing great. And again, I stress this, recognize in their own terms. It cannot be an authority from outside. They must see it themselves, and they must compare it in the terms they understand, they value, they appreciate, in order to own the solutions and to spread them out, to apply them in their own environments, for which they are the foremost experts, not the people, not the authorities from the outside. Nitra nad Diplom is a small village, 800 people, located in the southern part of central Slovakia, and it has an ethnic composition of 70% Roma and 30% non-Roma, and it's a special case about villages of this side and in this region, because usually people are moving out of such villages, but in this case people are moving in because of the quality of life which is being developed there. And one can say that the intergroup relations in Nitra nad Diplom are on a much higher and much more positive level as one would find anywhere in Slovakia.
Okay, so I'm Inger, and I'm a consultant for the PD Academy in Denmark. And we worked with vocational school dropout, which is a very big problem in Denmark. 50% of students going to vocational sector drops out, which is a big problem because we don't have any educational alternative. So they will be unemployed, most of them, for the rest of their life if they don't have an education and complete this education. So we worked with the PD approach with teachers who wanted to challenge the notion that it was a natural consequence of the current legislation that 50% had to drop out because they were in no way adequate to have an education. And one of the teachers, whose name is Kim, he had been doing the discovery, and he had been finding some practices and some key insights as to how come young men who are not ready to have an education, who are not the typical grade A student, how did they complete their education? And he found that one of the key insights was that a 20-week long auto mechanic basic education was too long. It was simply incomprehensible to look 20 weeks ahead, and even looking a year ahead in the future plans was too much. You had to have a plan from Monday to Friday. You have to have very specific deadline, and actually the student itself had to be the boss of those deadlines. And then you had to have again a goal from Friday to Monday, because weekends for a vulnerable young man who might enjoy substance of different kind can be a very big obstacle. So when do we see each other on Monday, at what time and where? And why is it it's important that you show up every morning? Was a key insight. So one day, Kim looked out of the window and saw 8 boys standing on a parking lot kicking tires. They'd been kicked out of school. Torben, their teacher, had given up. They were too impossible. They had conflicts. They were making disturbances in his classroom. They were coming and going as they saw fit, very provocative, because these boys believed in excluding themselves before Torben expelled them. So Torben said, this is it, 8 boys, you can go out. And 8 boys out of a class of 40 is a quite big dropout percentage already right there. And Kim picked them, fetched them on the parking lot and said, so come on, we do an experiment. You have your teacher sessions with me, but otherwise you follow Torben's class. And during those teacher sessions, he worked with these specific targets, breaking down the learning goals and learning targets, not from 20 weeks until future plans, but until 5-day plans, and even weekend plans. And he managed to make a social structure between the 8 boys so they would be able to have a support system and help each other to get up in the morning and actually come to school. And 13 weeks later, all 8 boys graduated and are now excellent students at the next level of education and will become excellent auto mechanics, even though they still say that they know some tricks, so they haven't become grade A citizens. For Torben, who kicked the students out, it was a key insight as to this is not an intractable problem. He thought it was natural that these boys could never have an education. But seeing what Kim did, he learned that there was a solution possible, and all of a sudden he wanted to learn what Kim did. How did Kim have his teacher sessions? So now Torben has his teacher sessions the same way, and the dropout rate has improved ever since. And once Torben started to do this, because Torben was not interested in doing PD discovery processes, other auto mechanic teachers have joined him at the table and are interested in learning how can we solve a current problem, which is not the dropout rate for the teachers, but actually reducing the level of conflict in their teaching so they can concentrate on what they enjoy the most.
Hello, my name is Mark Munger. I am based in New York City and I'm associated with the Plexus Institute, which is a complexity science think tank based in healthcare trying to apply complexity science problems to seemingly intractable problems. You must know that many people believe the US healthcare system is radically broken. 1% of our patients account for 30% of our costs, according to some economists. These so-called super users make many, many hospital visits, and there are a number of errors that result in their treatment, duplication of effort. It's also widely thought that 50% of healthcare expenses occur in the last 2 years of life. So a person's life budget, if you will, of healthcare accounts in the 2 years just before leaving life. One of the problems of reform in this system is political. A second problem is organizational, institutional, and cultural, in which many healthcare organizations don't realize either the severity of their problems or see them as economic problems. So with the assumption that the healthcare system is terribly broken, part of the question is how one measures the brokenness. It can be measured in economic terms, in terms of the percentage of our GDP, but it also needs to be measured in human terms. Roughly 100,000 people a year die of hospital error. Of that 100,000, 20,000 deaths can be attributed to MRSA infection and other hospital-acquired infections. If there were a 747 crashing every day, we would begin to accumulate wreckage and be more curious about this disaster than we currently are. So the question is, are there any ways to think of hope, to look at what's working in the healthcare system that's happening below people's consciousness or imagination, and why change in healthcare is so slow, what the resistance is? For example, we've known regarding hospital-acquired infections for 100 years that to wash hands and to practice good hand hygiene reduces infection, but it's very difficult in many hospitals to practice that. Some studies suggest that as many as 300 hospital personnel will touch directly or indirectly a patient in the course of a hospitalization, and it requires that each member of that chain of care, chain of continuity, be quite alert and quite disciplined in washing his or her hands and taking other appropriate hygienic measures before going into a patient's room or actually coming into contact with the patient. But over the past 7 years, 8 years, under funding from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, 6 beta site hospitals began to initiate their own performance management improvement efforts using an approach that's asset-based. And instead of looking at why people don't wash their hands, they began to look at why people followed good practices. In effect, why do people do what they know they should do, whereas some of their peers do not do what they should do. So a group of people came in and investigated and began to inquire using a technique called the Discovery and Action Dialogue. What's the state of your awareness about hospital-acquired infection and how is it practiced on this unit? And to their surprise and their happy surprise, they learned that some people were able to wash their hands 100% of the time. The inevitable question then was, what do they do? How do they do that? And the inevitable answer was, let's go and find out. So this began a process of inquiry that generated very illuminating data, why some people with the same constraints and same resources could have much better outcomes than people just like themselves. Once this social proof emerged that someone just like me could do better than I'm doing, I was then inspired to learn what that person might do, and I would follow him or her and try to learn their practice, and I would practice it until I was better with it. And guess what? The outcomes got much better. And people who began to create scorecards of infection reduction, the normal metrics, but also days passed on a unit without infection, began to be very motivated that they were making progress. And in fact, after a 2-year period, sophisticated research indicated that infection in these hospitals have been reduced by 73%. And further research indicates that that outcome has been sustained. So the question is, what made it sustainable? First of all, the community recognized that it had a problem. Secondly, that community discovered that there were people who had better outcomes than others. Third, they tried to find out what those people did. Once those discoveries had been made, then there was an effort to practice and disseminate those strategies, and that worked. 73% reduction, and nurses who have a concern for budget but also a concern for other things were able to reflect. One nurse in particular said, I came into medical situations and healthcare as a calling. I believed it was noble. Based on the data that we had that would have projected harm of infection, 19 fewer people did not leave our unit this year in body bags, and that's what my life is about. There are 2 other examples in which you might be interested. One is a man who unfortunately is no longer with us, who died last year, a transportation orderly at Albert Einstein Hospital in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Jasper was a transportation orderly, and his job was to move people around the hospital in wheelchairs and on gurneys. Jasper was a sophisticated, conscientious man who believed it was his duty and his responsibility to protect people from infection. Not just protecting patients, but protecting his peers and colleagues, other doctors and nurses. So Jasper, on his own, but with some support, developed a way to disentangle himself from his protective clothing and found a way to extricate clothing and gear that might be quite contaminated with microbes, which could pass on and cross-contaminate other surfaces or other people. He found a brilliant way to dispose of his contaminated outer garments, his gear. And he took great pride in making a short video which showed him doing this, and he became celebrated and became a local hero in his hospital, and it became known as the Jasper Palmer Method. And before his retirement and then his unfortunate early death, Jasper thought of his legacy as having saved infection from people who would not volunteer for it and helping promote healthy lives.
Hello, I'm Jasper Palmer from the Albert Einstein Medical Center Escort Department. I'm here to show you a simple technique of disposing of isolation gowns after contact in an isolated room. It's a method that's very simple. Notice. the gown has been inverted. Now I start to make a nice little ball. This prevents from air from getting in, making it too hard to handle. Nice slow roll, over and over. And observe the glove. Grasp in the middle. First one goes over the top, and the second one goes over that, creating a nice little ball that you can now dispose of in the trash can, anywhere from 50 to 150 with no spillage. Thank you.
So part of the task of innovation in any large complex institution is how to innovation move from one unit to another. Particularly people are apprehensive about best practices, and although evidence-based medicine is our standard of care, often evidence-based is variable in its application. So people within the hospital began to think about how to take an innovation like Jasper Palmer's and diffuse it or spread it. And one of the things they did is that who'd be interested in this? Well, there's some obvious targets. The environmental services group doesn't want to handle toxic Superfund materials. So they became a very quick audience because Jasper was able to show them how to protect themselves from a possible cross-contamination. But more important, nurses and doctors who put on and take off protective clothing and protective equipment, personal protective gear all the time, they needed to know how to do this. So this dissemination began in many ways. People began a whisper campaign. Have you seen what Jasper Palmer produced? People invited Jasper to come to their units. People had coffees where Jasper was the celebrity interview. And people began not an urban myth or legend about Jasper, but it occurred to people that there are many people with great skills and great competence who have hidden solutions in our hospital. How do we uncover them, and how do we start acting in ways that promote the building of social networks, so we get out of our silos, we get out of the usual ways of doing things, and we start to learn from people like Jasper. And the last piece of it was sometimes people are reluctant to leave their duty stations and go someplace else. There developed some informal self-organized training about asking people to come to a meeting and saying, what would it take to get you there? We've got something pretty interesting, which is Jasper Palmer's innovation. Have you heard of that? Oh yeah, I have heard of that. Why don't you come? There'll be coffee. What would be a good time for you to come? So they tried to make it as convenient and easy and culturally consistent as possible. And actually Jasper had an interview with the chief executive of the hospital and showed him how to do it, and that became kind of a joke that the chief executive practiced taking off the personal protective equipment.